City of Northglenn, Channel 8, keeping you informed of events in your community.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our March 5th City Council study session. Joanna, would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Dodge.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Escobar.
Here.
Councilmember Sowers will be absent. Councilmember Leidy. Here. Councilmember Downing. Here. Councilmember Brown will be absent. Councilmember Whitman. Here. Councilmember Duran-Mullica. Here. Councilmember Wilford. Here.
Thank you. We will get right into our agenda, and first item is Xcel Energy franchise agreement. And Jim, you're going to take this one with some help?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So with us tonight is Preston Gibson from Xcel Energy. If you want to come up and have a seat up front, it'd be great. And then of course, Mr. Hoffman, our city attorney, is here. What we wanted to do on the franchise agreement is kind of twofold. Number one, just brief you on that we're doing it and that why we need to do it, maybe some of the benefits to the city. And then Preston's here tonight to answer any questions you may have about it, but also talk about some of the really neat initiatives that Xcel is undertaking right now. Some of you, I guess no one's here tonight. It was both the Browns and Councilmember Sowers were at a meeting we had at CML last year, and where we learned about some of these things, and so he'll be able to update us on that as well. So with that, I'll just kind of dive in about the franchise agreement. We'll kind of go from there. So the current franchise agreement was approved in 1994 and is set to expire in August of 2019. So 25-year agreement. Xcel Energy reached out to us because it does take a while to negotiate these agreements and seeking to extend the term for another 20 years. I actually have a draft of the agreement right now, but we're not necessarily prepared to negotiate that here in the study session tonight. But I just want to point out some of the highlights. The main purpose is so that the city would grant Xcel the non-exclusive right to make reasonable use of our right-of-way, basically our streets, our easements, so it can provide utility services to our residents. That's the main purpose of a franchise. But it also includes provisions for placing facilities in the city. Street and traffic signal lighting are included. There's a lot of provisions about the construction of improvements. And in these agreements, we always make sure that the public works code requirements for work in the right-of-way, permitting, all of those things are at least referenced in the agreement, if not explicitly stated in the agreement. The Xcel also pays a franchise fee to the city as a percentage of gross revenues, which is passed along to customers. So if you're familiar with the PEG fee we did with Comcast, it's very similar to that. Everyone who pays Xcel has a fee on their bill, which is pretty standard. Periodic audits of the fee payments are completed. They do annual reporting. And Mr. Loveland had informed me that this generates around $825,000 annually for the city, which goes into our general fund. Another source of funding in the agreement is the underground conversion program. And this is a program where Xcel budgets and allocates 1% of gross revenues for underground line projects. And so if we have a development, I think Webster Lake Promenade is the most recent example where we can work with Xcel to design the system to be undergrounded as opposed to having above ground lines as were built 40, 50 years ago. The entire agreement process can take 12 to 18 months. So when you think of an August 2019 deadline, we're right on time, I think. We've started the process right now. We do have a target completion date in the first half of 2019, so it may take us about 12 months to get through all this. That's really the information I wanted to outline. There is a sheet attached in your packet that talks about benefits to Northglenn. This was provided by Mr. Gibson. I think it's a real good summary and a little bit more detail about some of the things I was just discussing. But with that, I turn over to Preston and maybe kind of walk through some of the highlights from your end, and we'll go from there.
Well, Jim, again, Preston Gibson with XL Energy. I think you covered that really well. I think one of the biggest benefits for the city is we are required to comply with all your ordinances, all your regulations, for the benefit of allowing us to put our infrastructure in your road rights of way and in other city property based on agreements. I'll tell you, we pay a 3% franchise fee, and I looked at it, it is over $800,000 a year. In addition, we put 1% of the gross electric sales into the undergrounding fund for you to bury power lines in key areas, like Jim said, in Webster Lake Promenade was a good example. We have franchise agreements with I believe all the municipalities and all the towns that are in our service territory, and that amounts to about 165. These are 20-year agreements. That's a typical term. I think some of the older agreements, this may be one of them, were up to 25-year terms. Not sure if that was the case here, but some were 25, some were 20. They've gotten larger over the years. I can tell you that the more the attorneys get involved, hi Corey, the larger they get, and not just Corey, our team too. So so used to be there about 20 pages, as I've seen some about 20. Now they're about 35 to 40, but we do cover a lot of ground in 35 to 40 pages. It usually takes probably 8, 10, 12 discussions with your attorney and your city manager and your team and our team on negotiating the franchise agreement. And because schedules are busy, it does drag it out and take some time. And it usually does take 6 months to a year and sometimes longer to negotiate an agreement. In the final analysis, all the cities that I've worked with, we've come to an amicable agreement on the franchise agreement terms, and I don't anticipate anything different here. I think that pretty well sums it. I'd be glad to answer any questions, though.
Questions for Preston? Oh, I have a question.
Okay.
I'm just curious, the way that this was presented, and Jim, where you wrote what will be in the agreement, are those the main changes from the old 25-year-old agreement to this agreement? Or, like, I guess I'd kind of like to see, well, what are the changes from the last agreement?
And correct me if I'm wrong, Preston, but these are all the major sections of the current agreement.
Of the current
And so they'd
agreement.
probably be refreshed with
Okay.
current technologies and other best practices.
These are the benefits of the current agreement.
Okay.
You can look at an old agreement and compare if you wanted to do that. I'm sure your team could do that as well. Here comes your attorney to weigh in on that.
I'm just curious if there are major, I would assume over 25 years things change,
Things
so.
do change. I will say this, that what we do is we negotiate agreements with a number of cities. We're always negotiating agreements. And most typically, we try to bring the benefits of those agreements forward into the new agreement, so you generally get the benefit of the other agreements we've negotiated over time in this agreement. So that's the way that works, but if you wanted an analysis of the old versus new, I'm sure your team could do that.
I won't ask them to do that. I would assume
Yeah.
that they will bring anything
Yeah.
that's very important to us, so.
Yeah.
And Mayor, if you'd like, I can give you 2 examples that I think probably are good ones of the types of things that change over time. During the pendency of this franchise agreement, we had an issue with putting city facilities on XL poles. That was a significant issue for the city of Northglenn. We hope to be able to address that issue somehow, some way in the current franchise when we update it, and we've certainly been successful in doing that in other places. Likewise, Preston and I recently arm wrestled a bit over how the city can be assured that it is getting a good deal when the 1% undergrounding fund is used, to know that it's not being overcharged, that it's being either put out to bid or there is some competitive process so that that 1% fund is being used in a manner that the city knows that those dollars are being spent responsibly. Those are 2 examples of issues that I think change over time that we're going to try to address in the upcoming franchise negotiations.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Can
Thank you.
I ask a question about the 1% fund that we're talking about? So thinking about Northglenn, we don't have a lot of future development. Does that limit our ability to use this 1% fund? I mean, is it only new developments, or like,
Not necessarily. That's something we can certainly, there's a push and pull in terms of what is regulated by the PUC related to the 1% fund and what we can negotiate, but we try to achieve as much bang for our buck with that 1% as we can.
Madam Mayor, may I address the attachment to the poles issue, because I remember that was a huge issue here. And I remember especially relative to Christmas decorations, and that was a big problem. And I think we're beyond that, fortunately. The way we do it today is we kind of went back to where we were, and we just simply ask you where you want to put those attachments. We check out the poles to see if they're able to, from a structural standpoint, able to handle that weight. And then we essentially tell you, go right ahead and put those attachments on. But don't damage our poles. That's kind of the way we handle it now.
I assumed it was a moot point because I haven't heard that brought up in a long time, so I thought everything was good.
Right.
All right, are there any other questions regarding the agreement for Preston? All right, hearing none, you can keep on going.
Just want to talk about a couple of things here, and thank you for the time to address a couple of things, because we really got I think we're heading in the right direction as a company, especially relative to adding renewables to our system in the right way, at a cost that makes sense, at a cost that's not increasing for our customers. One of those is with the Colorado Energy Plan. You wrote a letter in support of this, and I'm very grateful for you doing that. And this plan is something that's currently before the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. And we did have some cities come out and testify in support, as well as organizations, last 3 or 4 weeks ago, which was great to see. This plan, and I'm just going to refresh your memory on what this does real quickly, this will enable us to put a lot more renewables on our system. We would actually shut down 2 of our coal-fired gas turbines at our Comanche plant outside Pueblo, and that those generate currently 660 megawatts of electricity, and then we would replace that by and large with renewables. We'd also be able to add some natural gas generation, but by and large, I think the majority of it would be renewables. What we're looking to do is move today from 29% renewable to 55% renewable just in 8 years, which is pretty phenomenal. Just in the next 4 years, we're going to be to 41% renewable with our Rush Creek Wind Project, a huge wind turbine project on the eastern plains of Colorado. So we're moving today from about 29 to 41%, and then hopefully to 55%. And the Colorado Energy Plan is a big, big part of that. And your support of that was really appreciated by our company. So just wanted to express that. Another program that we have coming up, these are handouts, by the way, you've got in front of you, is Renewable Connect. Renewable Connect is a program that was approved by the Public Utilities Commission last year. And this enables us to add 50 megawatts of solar energy to our system. 50 megawatts, I can tell you, I was surprised to hear how large that is. We're going to build 185,000 solar panels on a field that's east of Deer Trail, Colorado, which is east of, Indale Deer Trail, which is east of Parker. 185,000 pounds. They're going to all track the sun, so they're going to move with the sun, and it's going to be on a size of, I think it was 300 football fields, if you can imagine that. So it's going to be really huge, and we're adding that to our system, and then we're making it available in another about another month or so. It's going to be available for, first of all, for our C-rate customers. So if you currently, just as an example, as the best way I can explain it as an example, if you're a business or if you're a residential customer, so it's going to be available for residential customers and C-rate customers first, you can, for your first year, it would be exactly the same cost as getting your electricity today. All right, now you're 29% renewable. If you go online, if you got an account online and you elect to participate in this program on a 10-year contract, there's 1, 5, and 10-year contracts, your electricity would be the same cost as it is today, and it would come all from renewable energy, all from solar energy from this program. Then over time, if the cost, because what happens, how this is in cost parity, is we know the fixed cost of developing this system, and we also know the cost of generating electricity with non-renewable sources like coal and natural gas. Well, if the cost of generating electricity with coal and natural gas climbs, you get even greater benefit, greater offsets to the cost. So your cost would actually go down because we're not having to generate electricity with that higher cost in that method. If the cost of natural gas and coal goes down, then your cost would go up. What's the chance of that happening over time? Probably not going to. More than likely, it's going to go up. So this is going to be a very, very popular program. And I'm promoting it to all the cities in my area. And I hope all the cities in my area, I cover a 5-county region, but I hope all of them take advantage of this, because I think it's going to be really huge. And I think businesses that, for example, want to be renewable and want to take advantage of solar energy, if they, let's say they lease a space, they can't, put solar energy on their rooftop. We have other programs. We have solar rewards. We have solar rewards community where you have community gardens. This is just another option. But if you can't put panels on your roof, or you don't want to put panels on your roof, you want to make it an easy way to get into solar energy with low cost, this is the way to do it. So I promoted it to your economic development director. I think she's pretty excited about promoting it to your community. And we're talking about it with all of our cities, because a lot of times cities want to lead the way. They want to lead the way with renewable energy. This is a great way for a city to lead the way with renewable energy. Looking at your accounts, your C-rate accounts, and then signing up for this program. We're going to have a webinar coming up on, I think I sent you the date, I think it was March 26th, Jim. And it's for cities to take advantage of and look at, it's at 1 p.m. I think on March 26th. To understand better from some people who really know all the details of this program, and then answer questions. So I think it's going to be really, really popular. And also I wanted to just in final say that we're going to come out in the next, I think, couple of weeks and talk to your sustainability committee. I'll be out. We've got 1 or 2 other team members that are going to come out with me and try to tell them about all the existing programs that we have, plus the upcoming programs. So I appreciate your time this evening. I'm available for any questions.
Questions or Preston? No.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. This is a really exciting, the Renewable Connect, that's really exciting for businesses, so we might be looking into it.
It's going to be a really popular program. So thank you so much for your time this evening. Thank you.
Okay. Our next agenda item is the traffic calming community meetings update. Hi, Brooke. We have Brooke and Kent tonight, huh? Yay.
That wasn't what we rehearsed. You were supposed to lead the conversation. I'm supposed to be the remember? We were switching off.
Arguing already, huh?
It never works out. Good evening, Mayor. Do you want me to go ahead and do it, Jim? Okay. Didn't want to get in front of Jim either. Okay, so tonight we're here to give you an update on the 2 traffic calming meetings that we had for Melody and Claude. In your packet, the staff memo refers to sort of the outcomes that came from those 2 meetings. One of which is for Melody, there was strong support for implementing some of the Connect Northglenn recommendations, and then for Claude, speed humps seemed to be the prevailing feedback that we received. So what we've done in this memo is we've kind of laid out a couple of paths forward here for moving this project or this effort forward to a more comprehensive approach. But what I wanted to do tonight was just sort of touch on the fact that we have some preliminary estimates for what this looks like in terms of doing the design and implementation for these 2 projects, as well as a suggestion here that we not take necessarily any action on doing these 2 projects tonight until we have the 112th and Livingston projects that we're coming back to you in May with as part of a comprehensive look at what all of these current efforts would essentially amount to in terms of a design cost budget as well as a CIP project. Now, the last part of our staff memo here under the recommendations is that we believe that if we were to take a more holistic approach to this and sort of have a little bit more time to look at not just these needs, but also the residential street program, the 4 mills, and really come together and try to figure out a way to be more strategic about how we execute and implement these improvements, where we get much more value than saying what is the current flavor of the month concern, and trying to create some really meaningful impacts in terms of road maintenance, traffic impact, that we understand our concerns in the community for safety, as well as looking at our Safe Routes to School program, the Complete Streets project, the Corridor Master Plan, as well as the Connect Northglenn. When we look at all of these in a sort of composite, we can come up with a better program to do that. And that's kind of where I think on the staff level, once we have the Livingston and 112th project, we'll have a better understanding of what the immediate needs look like and how we can incorporate them into this bigger conversation. That being said, if there is a desire to move some of these things in advance of that overarching effort, we are adaptable and we can address that as well.
I just want to add one thing to what Brooke was saying. April 2nd, we'll be coming back with the retreat debrief.
Oh, thank you.
And if you recall, our kind of end of the day discussion was, what do we do with the 4 mills now that we have it permanently? And so we've got $1 million funding source there that we have not necessarily designated for anything yet. It has to be used for roads, and so perfectly appropriate, as you see in here, to use it for this stuff. But I think it does require more of a comprehensive discussion about, should we put $1 million into Melody and then wait a year and then do Claude, or that type of thing. So.
And let me also throw out, and Ken, help me out with the actual separate efforts that we do, but we have the residential street program, we have the sidewalk program, we have the CDBG funds that have also been used for sidewalk that we're looking to do for Connect Northglenn. And then we have the 4 mills that we're talking about. And right now, all of those efforts are sort of uncoordinated in terms of their strategic value. We look at what the high priority is for fixing sidewalks, but the question becomes as well, if we're looking at sidewalks over here and we've got a Safe Routes to School issue over here and we've got a traffic calming issue here, what if we were to reappropriate those monies and really get bang for the buck and actually have impactful outcomes, as opposed to what I would say is more of a triage approach where we're kind of plugging the holes instead of taking a more, as I said earlier, a holistic approach. Now, the trade-off is that maybe we work in one area of the community in year X, and then in year Y we're in another area, as opposed to spreading it out, which is kind of what we're doing now, and how we distribute the funds. So just another thing for food for thought with that.
All right, we'll open it up for discussion. Questions, Julie?
Quick question is, so when you're talking about coming back with a holistic approach, remind me, I'm not sure if you said this, what would your timeline be? When would we be able to get an idea of this holistic approach that you're talking about?
So I think part of one of the things that we're working on the staff side is to develop something for the 2019 budget cycle. So this would be something that we would look at implementing in 2019.
Which is actually pretty imminent, because we're going to be doing package requests from the departments in May. So, and I think the corridor plan we were talking about, having that be a Q2 2018 effort, really just kind of
dusting that off and getting it finalized. So,
and this is a planner, so that's why there's an engineer up here, okay? And that's why he's here to temper this. But I think ultimately, we have taken so many different efforts to address a similar theme that we hear throughout the community. With the Connect Northglenn, it was, how do we make our streets safer? How do we get kids and people to and from places that are important, like to public resources and into retail areas, as well as safe corridors to school? And then we also have this issue of people speeding. And then we also have an issue of the life cycle costs of our pavement, and how do we realistically implement all that? Well, the thing is we've looked at them all individually, and what we're suggesting is if we look at it more comprehensively, we might be better in how we allocate those resources.
Other questions? Jenny?
Less of a question, just more of a statement. I appreciate wanting to do a holistic approach. I think that, that's something that I wish that we've been doing for a very long time, so we wouldn't be in this place. But I'm really concerned about pushing this to 2019, because by the time we push it to 2019, then there's going to be a whole time where we're accepting bids and deciding how and when, and then it's 2020 or 2021 before the work ever gets done. And from what I've been hearing from residents, I hear about code enforcement and I hear about speeding. And I'm just not comfortable continuing to sit on my hands and wait even longer for something to be done. I think it's pretty clear, at least with the Melody, that there was a significant number of Ward 4 residents who came, more so than any other street. And I'm not saying that the residents on other streets where there's speeding present don't care. I just want to say publicly that I'm not okay waiting until 2019, and I think we need to figure it out.
Any other comments? Joyce?
Yeah, I like the holistic approach, but I also agree with Jenny that the folks on Quad Court are not going to be very happy, you know, if you decide to wait for another year or so. So I think we need to take a hard look at what we can do. But I do want to wait and see what we get from 112th and Livingston. I do want to get that information.
And our intent is to come back and do that. And we understand the challenge here. And so that's kind of why we're having this conversation, is because we do want that feedback and get some consensus on this, because recognizing the immediacy of what has long been an outcry for many, and how do we best approach that. And I think from a staff side of it, the one thing that I get concerned about is that that's the only way then we end up distributing CIP projects, is based off of who's making the most noise, and not necessarily looking at what is the greatest benefit or the greatest strategic value for implementation. And that's the balance we need to try to find. So I think that what I would just, once again, I think this is probably, as again, this is an update tonight. So what I would suggest is when we get with the council debrief that's coming up on April 2nd, and then we'll be also then giving you an update on the Livingston, we can have a more informed conversation about what the best path forward. And maybe it's yeah, we move forward with the design and on these two issues and look at implementing them in next year, but also understanding that we really do want to try to chase down this other option so that we don't lose sight or focus of how we can best utilize our resources.
I agree with that, Brooke. I guess what I would say also is that one of the things we were talking about is that we've got the April 2nd update. I think looks like May 21st we're coming back with 112th and Livingston. I think we have an opportunity, depending on what the cost might be, when we get completed with the audit of the 2017 budget. You've heard Mr. Loveland talk about a potential surplus. There could be an appropriation amendment in 2018 to kick off those design pieces. And then we could get that started, which then would enable us to start funding in 19 for the actual construction.
How long does the design piece take? Are we talking about 3 months? Are we talking about 6 months?
So I think what would realistically, within the window of time that we have right now, is that we would do the A&E design in 2018 and look to implement in 2019, and more so not because of not being able to get the designs done in time as much as it is for getting good pricing, as well as also weather and timing on that. Because doing it in the cold weather months, whether you're applying down paint or if you're putting in asphalt, you're going to pay a premium and you may not get the quality that you otherwise would.
Yeah, I think the design itself is pretty straightforward. I mean, I'd look at Kent, but you're looking at pavement conditions, which we have that analysis already, and it's really implementing this list here of striping and mill and overlay, and
You've got a lot of that's directed through the Connect Northglenn plan already, right?
We've got identified project elements. Yeah. Okay. Is that what you're asking? Mm-hmm. Okay. And just by way of reference for this timing issue, because you're going to get asked the question, why do we have to wait so long? 2 years ago, we had the CDBG sidewalk project, and we put the bid out, I believe, in April or May to do in the fall. And the pricing was about, I think it was 150% over the budget that we had budgeted. We put it out for bid in the fall for the spring construction, and we actually came in under budget for what we had originally estimated. So it's a question of hitting the trades when they have capacity and trying to hit that cycle. And so that's one of the things we have to function. So when the question comes up, it's because it's how we get our best pricing.
Yeah, I just want to say two things, Brooke. I am in favor of sooner than later, and the one that makes the most noise is usually the one that's most dissatisfied.
That's correct.
So this melody thing is started before I got on council, and obviously, hardly a day goes by that somebody doesn't say, well, when are you going to do something? Mm-hmm. Say, well, I can't do anything myself. We have to
Well, I will tell
increments.
I will tell you personally, having been here 6 years, and Ashley can back me up, we wanted to do the pilot project on Melody because of that need, but we were so concerned about the blowback that we would otherwise get because it was divided as far as what could be done, that I will say I'm much happier with the fact that the way we've gone forward. But yes, I totally understand what you're saying.
And I prefer the way we've been doing it because the level of participation that we had, I mean, you've had your day in court, this is what you're gonna get, you know. Before there was no day in court.
Right.
And if you just put a pilot out there, then they say, what did you do that for?
Right.
You know.
But just so that you know, it's been on my radar, and part of the Connect Northglenn was actually, we were thinking that Melody, both north and south of 104th, is like the perfect road to do this. And so we're kind of, I'm personally excited that we had such positive feedback on the Connect Northglenn for Melody, because I think it's really a valuable resource, and it's a very cost-effective approach. And more importantly is if people don't like it, it's more readily adjustable to where we can do additional measures that aren't necessarily that expensive that can also help address. So it's a good starting point.
Could I have you guys maybe explain these tables a little bit? Because one of the things that might not be intuitive by looking at it is that it's not necessarily everything on that list. And I think
there's a distinction there between a mill and overlay and a slurry. We wouldn't do both, right? And also the thermoplastic striping has a really long lifespan to it. And so the whole idea of, yeah, we could go put $250,000 of thermoplastic down there and then we got to go mill and overlay the road in 2 or 3 years. It'd be a waste of money. So I don't know, maybe I said what you were going to say anyway, but.
No, that's it. With respect to Melody.
Is that the reason?
Yeah.
All right.
With respect to Melody, you know, the PCI states that it is, the next treatment would be a mill and overlay, and we are doing the PCI again in 2019. So we'll be able to really see that data with the new technology that we're using now, see how the roads are reacting over the last 3 years. So, as Mr. Hayes stated, you know, we wouldn't want to just go out and put thermoplastic down and then mill and overlay it up in a couple of years. So you're looking at a significant cost there for the mill and overlay, which is the recommended treatment. If we don't have the funding available for that, it would be recommended at minimum to do a slurry or possibly a chip seal. I'm not sure that a chip seal is going to do much for that road, so we'd want to go for the cheaper option would be the slurry. And we picked slurry just because there is a third option, which would be grinding out the stripes, but I think everybody has driven on a road where they've grooved out the stripes and it's awful. So, you know, just kind of blacking it out, so to say, and restriping it out. And thermostriping, again, is the preferred option and the longevity for the thing. But there's also, you know, regular paint options that we use with our normal operations. And that could be looked at as well as we get into a design for that as a possible cheaper option. It wouldn't last as long, but, you know, we would just have to maintain that through our operations staff.
And Kent, related to that, you see speed radar signs on there. I look at those as something potentially we could even do this year if we were ready, because those are going to be theoretically, you know, behind the walk or behind the curb. It's not something that's going to be impacted by road construction, and it might be, if we're going to do it anyway, it might be an effort we could put out there this year, and then when we come back and explain what we're doing with the whole road next year.
Can I ask, what was the community's feedback on the speed radar signs? Did anyone like them? Did anyone want them? Those who attended that meeting?
On the attachment 1, it just kind of shows where the voting kind of in the middle of the section. It's the first page after the memo. And so in the middle there, it kind of just shows where the voting kind of lied with the folks that showed up for the meeting. So they were met favorable. And that's why we kind of put all the options with, again, the main focus being the striping plan, but you know, with these other elements, they could also assist in the traffic calming, and that will help if we you know, get a professional traffic engineer on board and be able to sit down and let you know what the elements are that would really work to reduce this down. And kind of moving on to Claude with the speed humps, you know, we showed the speed hump that is kind of the asphalt one that goes down, but we recently, just between the time the memo went out, we were waiting for pricing, but I think it's on the very last page on the attachment, and you'll see the one in the center, which is more of a kind of a bolt down speed hump that we wouldn't necessarily have our operations staff or a contractor go out and actually affix the permanent one on the roadway. We can purchase these, and I think they're around $7,000 or $8,000 a piece. And then if, we put them down in the spacing, and it's tough for folks to understand, what that spacing would be. It's recommended about every 500 feet. And I tried to say during the meetings, if you imagine driving down and seeing a manhole, manholes are spaced about 300 feet apart. So every manhole or every other manhole, you're going to get a speed hump. But that, again, unless you're driving that, folks don't really understand. So before we would want to go out and spend, thousands of dollars on permanent speed humps, it may be recommended to put down these plastic ones that may be reusable, and maybe we slow folks down, and maybe over time we pick up every other one or something. You don't know what that really looks like, but at least it gives us an option where we can pull them up with relative ease and not destroy the street.
To add to Ken's comment is, I think one of the things that we haven't talked about is that when we hire a consultant, they're going to take everything that we've consolidated, and they may come up with recommendations that could either be more cost effective or have a higher impact that may not necessarily be speed humps every 500 feet. It could be other implementation measures, traffic calming measures that may make as much sense, but may not be exactly what people said, but may have a better impact in terms of managing the issues of concern that are on those corridors. So that's another piece to this that will also help with our value engineering and our costing out when we look at implementation.
Thank you. So when I'm looking at the non-traffic calming stuff, I'm seeing that first preference was connect to Northglenn, second was speed humps. And hearing you talk about how some of the temporary speed humps may be reusable, has there been any consideration given to placing temporary speed bumps in Melody as a sort of a more immediate traffic calming approach, while we design and plan for the overall changes that we're going to be making?
I think that's kind of why we're here. We haven't done anything as far as a design or what that would be. We wouldn't want to put something out there that would hurt, I guess. I don't know if hurt's the right word, but wouldn't be effective, and it would just almost be a Band-Aid as an expectation and not have the professional engineering background to support that. So Melody would be a difficult one to do. Claude may be a little bit easier because it is a straight stretch and it's a narrower right-of-way width. Melody's, as everybody knows, is very, very wide and would be a significant, if we put speed humps out on Melody across that whole width of lane, we're driving the cost up, even on a temporary basis, I would think.
I guess what I'm trying to get to is what can we do now to
Right.
make a difference? I said it earlier, I don't want to wait until 2020, 2021 for residents to have some relief. And Antonio's right. Our residents who live along Melody Drive are very, very vocal, and not just one, that they want some relief and they don't want to wait either. So, I would be really interested in, what are some temporary things we can do right now that are going to last, the next 2 years that make a difference as we prepare to be able to do the Connect to Northglenn across the city, or even if we're just piloting on Melody. Yeah, and then a final comment, just that I've really appreciated all that you have done, both of you, in terms of making sure that folks had the opportunity to weigh in and share what their preferred traffic calming method was. I think that that was really empowering for a number of folks to be able to come and feel like they were being heard and that we were being responsive. So thank you for taking that step. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Ken, can I just ask a question on the PCI, because you didn't really state the PCI, but you're saying it's kind of somewhere in between. Mm-hmm. So how bad is it, I guess?
Melody's pretty bad. Melody's at 47 right now, so it's ready.
Okay.
It's
but it wasn't it wasn't bad enough to be included on the streets program that we
No,
just
because
kind of
that, again,
approved.
that goes back to what we discussed a few weeks ago, and then kind of how Brooke and Mr. Hayes opened up today is these larger stretches of streets like a Claude or an Irma or a Melody, they take up so much of the money that we just don't have the ability to do those roads. I mean, 99th is a most recent example, and I hear, you know, we talk about time. I mean, when I came here 5 years ago, 99th Street was on the agenda to be done, and it took until last year to complete 99th. So that's a 5-year process in the making, and that didn't include any kind of traffic calming. That was just infrastructure and paving. So they're just such large segments, we can't fit them into our program. So then each one becomes a one-off in a CIP. And then where do you prioritize those in a CIP? You know, so taking all the things that we've done since Brooke and I have been here, I think we're doing a great job of looking at additional treatments for our streets, how the bikes and the peds can fit into our roadway sections. And you heard that when we presented residential streets. Just this year, there's 2 or 3 streets that we're going to be able to implement some additional striping. So it's taking all those efforts that we've all kind of been doing individually, as we say, but improving the programs and building a bigger, robust program to even make it better.
And I think that's the big challenge, is that some of these projects can't be done under the road maintenance. They become a CIP project, okay, which means then it's now, okay, what's the prioritization as it fits into the existing CIP plan, and how do we prioritize that? And that's part of what the debrief, I guess, we'll be covering a little bit when we come back in April. But this all comes back to, you know, what the council priorities are and how they reflect into the budget as far as moving forward when it comes to programming for things like this and implementation. And I think that's where we as staff, we're trying to figure out how do we stretch the dollars as far as we can with the resources we have. And that's where it's no longer a residential street paving program, it's now a CIP program. Or the CDBG, you know, pot of money is only $200,000, what can we do with that? No, by the way, that's limited to those census tracts that are CDBG eligible. And so how do you integrate all that? And that's really kind of where we're sort of taking this, what I say is, you know, kind of this you know, we're trying to plug all the holes at once, when really I think to kind of to echo the comments about the concerns is how do we do those in an appropriate way, but also make sure that we maintain balance with all the other expectations that are out there. So that's kind of what we're wrestling with, and I think you guys are hearing that. And once again, I think after we do the Livingston update, coming back to this to the concerns about, okay, well, one thing that we hadn't really thought about, or at least talked about much, is what can we do in the interim that maybe stopgap that helps at least address some of the pressure that is out there, but doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And I think if we can message that as well, that may go miles as well, pun intended.
It almost seems that, I mean, since we're mostly residential anyway, I feel like we've opened Pandora's box, and that this will come forward more often now. People are seeing that we're going to mediate the problem, and it definitely seems like a program that we're going to have just like the streets program. I could definitely see that coming down the slope. As far as Melody is concerned, I would agree that, you know, if you could do anything now would be great. Speed radar signs, obviously. Yeah. But I think you guys have done a great job, and keep moving forward. Anyone else first?
When you have the discussion, would it be possible to get just like a refresher list for all of us on council, what projects we did in CIP in exchange for not doing some of the street projects, just so we can see what we were weighing with how we decided to spend the CIP in the past 3 years?
I don't, well, let me put it this, and I'm maybe speaking out of turn, because I think the challenge is that the previous CIP effort has more or less been where are we with what needs to be done first and what is prioritized, and it hasn't been taken into this sort of context that we're not talking about. So I don't know that we necessarily sacrificed anything in the past. I think as much as it is that we've programmed.
We moved to those things and just really didn't look at other things. And I get that, but I think there's also the conversation of you're planning for future CIP, and that becomes a factor. You're looking at potentially, so the 1 mil is one thing, but if we looked at something else. there's a potential that we're taking money from another project. That's what
I think at the end of the day, with what the conversation may lead to is, what do you take off the CIP list to address this, and how is that a priority? And it's not a transportation issue. It could be a facility issue. It could be a maintenance issue, ongoing maintenance issue. And I think, you know, from a bigger, taking a step back, I think one of the things where we have transitioned as an organization and with the council is that it was a fix it when it breaks. And now we're sort of looking at, okay, we've got life cycle costs, let's try to get in front of that. Because in the past, you know, I think the rec center is a great example. We had a swimming pool that was over 20 years old and it had a life cycle of 10 or 12 years, and we kept patching and fixing it. And then everyone's like, why do we have to spend all this money now? You know, but at the same time, it's that same dynamic. When you look at the entire CIP program, it's like, how do we best manage that? And I think that'll be something we are taking a more aggressive approach in the more recent years than we have in the past.
We can absolutely, I mean, it'd be real simple for us to pull up the last 3 years CIP and provide that, so you can just refresh on what we've done. But I actually wrote down fix it when it breaks, because you just said that. That has been the approach for a long time, whether it be, you know, water and sewer pipes, storm drainage, the rec center, et cetera. I would tell you a couple things that, you know, decisions, if you will, that have been made. We used to take the Adams County Transportation Tax and put about half of that into the residential street program. So in 2017, I think, is when we changed that, and we put the whole $750 into it. And so this year, I think we had some project that didn't get done quite last year, and so we've got $880,000 we're putting into residential street program. In fact, I just signed the bid to go out this week. That's one thing. We tried to put more of that transportation dedicated money towards the spots where it needs to go. $750 isn't enough to stay up. We need well over $1 million, maybe $1.5 million per year to keep up. So that's a challenge. The other thing I would say is that if you think of the Civic Campus, we have over $15 million in the CIP fund balance. Council has directed, and we're implementing $13 million of that towards the infrastructure for the Civic Campus. So that is a decision that's been made, that we're not able to use that money for something else. Now that's transformational for the community, right? I mean, redevelop the Civic Campus with a new rec center, theater, senior center. It's transformational. So that's not a bad use of that money. It's just that's where a lot of it in terms of fund balance has gone to.
And Councilmember, just to your point, I think over the last few years, since we started doing additional treatments and we've been doing smaller segments within little cities, we're just now getting a little bit caught up, so to say. So we're getting to these larger segments, so they really haven't risen to the level of what we're saying now is now they're CIP kind of eligible, where they're going to be bigger, too big for our residential street program. So.
You know, I still want to go back to the concern. I just am worried that we've kind of let go of criteria as to how to bring your road forward with these concerns. We're going to have a meeting and residents are going to show up and voice their concerns, but there's no criteria. I mean, does that mean 5 people would get to come complain about their street and then we would address it and go through all this work and process? Or, I mean, we've kind of opened it up to say if you have a concern, and we want to hear their concerns. I get that part, but I don't want speed bumps on every street in Northglenn. So.
And that goes back to the traffic calming policy. And so the policy's only been in place for just a little bit over a year. And the policy is in fact working. We send Mr. Hayes updates on where we're at with the policy, I think about monthly, maybe bi-monthly. So I don't recall the exact numbers, but we probably had 30 or 35 triggers that would require a speed study. And in-house, we perform the speed study, and there's those 3 criteria that are met, average daily traffic and speed, 85th percentile and stuff. And so the majority of those do not make it past, the petition phase or the speed study that we perform. And the ones that do, the ones that get petitioned, those are the ones that are elevating. So I believe the traffic calming policy is working as it was intended to do, where before we had a policy, the staff time to address each individual concern was probably twofold. Somebody would say, I want a speed hump. Well, we didn't have any avenue to reject or deny a speed hump, so we'd have to do a speed study on it, each individual one. Now, if we've performed a speed study on a specific street and somebody else calls in with the same kind of request, we can use that data that was already done. So, and we try to redo those speed studies, every 6 to 12 months. So, I believe the policy is working, and 112th and Livingston are the two that have kind of risen above the policy, so to say, to make it to that next level, and I think that's a good thing.
So just to summarize, what I'm hearing is don't wait till 2019. So we're going to keep moving forward, if you will. I think a discussion of the 4 mills, the $1 million dedicated transportation, we'll have more discussion on that April 2nd. May 21st, we're coming back with 112th and Livingston. And remind me when that neighborhood meeting is again?
March 27th.
March 27th. So we'll assemble that and have a similar discussion on those 2 streets. And then I look at, working with Mr. Loveland on an appropriation amendment probably in June, where we could potentially kick off some design this year and then put that into the CIP for 19. With keeping in mind that we would be looking at maybe there's some interim things we can do that would still need to be designed, but maybe we could get them done in 18. It's just a matter of putting the numbers with the budget and see if we can match that up.
Thank you.
Good? Okay.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, guys.
We will move to the Legislative Policy Committee. Leading this, Jim and Corey? Why do you think you sit there? Go to the head of the table, please.
I'll start. I'm getting up to speed, I guess. I will tell you that as the staff support, along with Mr. Hoffman and Jeff Wilson, our lobbyist, the 3 of us provide the staff support for the Legislative Committee. And I understand how we got here tonight, where we're having the discussion. I will tell you that I think, and I handed this out to everybody too, just in case we need to reference it, but I think one of the challenges we've identified with an issues guide or a policy statement is that you can't possibly address every crazy bill, whether it's got merit or not, that's going to get introduced. And so the committee, I think, has done a good job of being thoughtful about a variety of bills, taking oppose and support positions where appropriate. But I understand the discussion last week is elevated it to tonight, where we need to probably have some process discussion with council about, are there check-ins that we need to make during the legislative session? Is the policy good enough? Does it need to be changed? Is an annual update enough? Those types of things. So just coming back from a vacation, that's what I know tonight. So I'll leave it to Jeff and Corey to add to that. So
I tried to capture in working with David to put together your memo what the discussion was, but I really think this is a question for the council in terms of how best to utilize the policy committee and make sure that the policy committee reflects the policies of the city council when something is not either explicitly or implicitly within the sort of the parameters of the city's adopted policy statement, and also the idea that it can't be changed. And so I understand the concerns that for the new council, this was done before the new council members were on the council, and if there is something in that guide that the council is uncomfortable with, it can always be revisited. But really, I'm trying to take good notes from this discussion so I can capture whatever the direction is.
Okay, so we have 2 members of the policy committee here tonight. So if you guys want to lead off, Jenny, we're kind of the ones that brought up the concerns, so go right ahead.
Well, so I think throughout the conversations that we've been having since the legislature started, it's become apparent that there's not a process to do any sort of check-in with other council members, and that we are taking positions, and then when we decide that we want to take action, whether that's sending our lobbyists to go and talk to particular legislators to kill a bill or support a bill, or providing testimony or sending a letter, there were some questions from staff as far as whether or not we needed full council consensus to do that. And so that's part of the reason why at our last council meeting, I asked for us to create some sort of policy or process by which all of the council was clear on the policies that we were, the positions that we were taking on particular pieces of legislation. And then that way the legislative committee could then subsequently go out and direct our lobbyist under that particular position. I will say that now more than ever with the expulsion of Steve Lepstock, I think it's absolutely critical that we do have council consensus and we're able to direct our lobbyists in a more meaningful way, because we are lacking representation at the moment. And from what it's looking like, it may be upwards of 30 days or more before we have representation again. So I think this is a really good opportunity to hit pause and be a little bit more thoughtful in the way that we engage with what's going on in the legislature. So I think what I had previously suggested, and I don't know if this is a place that we can start from, was that each regularly scheduled council meeting, we have our lobbyists come and join us, and we share any bills that the legislative committee has decided we want to support or oppose. And then council hears that. We can have a discussion as need be, but then council formally adopts those positions. And then my second ask was that we invite our lobbyists to join us at a regularly scheduled council meeting to give a full legislative wrap-up, an overview of their lobbying activities on behalf of the city and what sort of outcomes there were. And that way we're able to assess our impact and determine how we can do better or what we may need to scale up or scale back on.
All right. Anybody want to start the conversation?
I need to just clarify one thing.
Go ahead.
So I need to be clear. Are we talking about representation around bills, or are we talking about representation of who's going to get in their seat down there?
So we don't have we have a state senator right now who represents Northglenn, right, in terms of geographically, but we do not have a state house member at this time who is present and actively speaking on behalf of the city of Northglenn.
So the purpose of this discussion is, I think there's a couple questions. One, does the rest of council want to know what we're up to? Do you guys want to have information about which bills we're opposing and supporting? And then what is the mechanism of bringing bills that perhaps may not fall within this guide back to council to get a full-fledged support? I mean, should we just assume that all decisions on bills are made by the legislative committee? Are people comfortable with that? Or do you want us to come back and have that discussion with you? I think we're just concerned about transparency. We're concerned about just making sure that, if you're out and about somewhere or at a meeting and someone comes up to you and say, oh, I heard that Northglenn's supporting this bill, why is that? You actually have a leg to stand on and you have an idea of what we're up to. So I think it's just trying to gauge the rest of what council wants. What do you guys feel about that?
I want to know what you're doing. So
okay, somebody cares about what we're doing. Okay.
And I do think we need to develop some kind of a mechanism or process. And it's okay if we have an update, during the legislative session. I think it's good. I don't want the legislative committee to assume that the entire council is on board with something that 3 of the council people are thinking it's good, and maybe the rest of council is going, maybe not so much, so I would be on board with having some kind of a process and having feedback. It doesn't take that long, to do something like that.
Meredith?
I also think we need a process. I don't know how to do it because we don't want to overtake all of our meetings with updates from all of the commissions, but I think it's probably true for more than just this one. I think, we do probably a surface level job of I went to this meeting and this is what we did kind of thing. But I think being a little more proactive would help all the committees communicate so that we know what's going on. Or commissions, not committees.
And I think we need to draw it back to the legislative committee right now and have that discussion, and then we can talk about other committees that we're on, so.
No, I support the idea. I agree.
So maybe it would help interject here to explain how the committee operates now. Because I think short of an end-of-year written report last year, and maybe we had one issue we brought up, which was transportation related last year. We really didn't do much reporting out during the session. So Mr. Wilson, of course, works hard all week, and then sometime on Sunday or so, I get an update email from him about what has gone on during the week, bills we might be interested in that are either processing through committee or new bills that have dropped, although that kind of tends to wane this time of year. And then he actually attaches a link to a web-based program called State Bill Info. And it's customized for each client, so we have our own page, and it enables him to then track every bill that we want to track, oppose, support, monitor. And we actually have gotten in the habit of showing that on the screen. I know a couple of our members bring their laptops and follow along as well. And we just kind of go rapid fire update where we're at with those bills. And if there's new things or if there's things that the committee is hearing about that maybe we should be tracking but we're not yet, we'll bring those up and look them up and have a discussion. They have been taking roughly an hour to go through those, so 5:30 to 6:30 on regular council meeting nights. So that would probably be too much to do in a regular meeting, but that gives you an indication of maybe how we could, boil that down, if you will, to what they're doing now.
I think if you gave it to us in the format of like what they're saying, what are they opposing, what are they supporting, so we could read that ahead of time in our agenda if we're adding it as an agenda item, okay? What I'm questioning is where, and so correct me if I'm going to say this wrong, you said something about adopting everything as a resolution? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know if we necessarily would have to adopt as a resolution, but just have some sort of consensus that everybody agrees that these positions are correct. And that way we all have some sort of record of what we are actively supporting, what we're opposing.
So for oppose and support, I get it. What about the ones where there's questions? How do we?
So if we're just primarily monitoring a bill, I wouldn't say that that would be something that we would have to bring forward.
Right. But when the situation arises, and it will arise, that you're going to need an answer, maybe even before a council meeting, how are we going to approach that? Or if you do have time at a council meeting, how will that look? There's a bill coming forward, and
so I would say one is we would have, okay, so I think you should only be looking at new bills once they're introduced. And Jeff is bringing them to our attention. And then once we take a position on it and share it with council, then we don't talk about that bill again unless there are significant changes or we're changing our position. So every single council meeting, we're not going back through every single bill and where it is. We're only talking about new bills that have been introduced and any positions that are new or updated. And I absolutely hear you on the agenda part and the notice part. You're right, we would have to figure out making sure that that was done and updated and ready to be public by Wednesday or Friday.
Wednesday.
And so, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think in terms of, most of the legislation, I think, we're gonna have a heads up on the front end once it's been introduced, and we'll be able to make a determination in time to bring it forward to council. I mean, I think when things start to get hairy is towards the end of session, but they're all bills that have already been introduced that have already been through one chamber or another. So I don't really, outside of, I don't see that particular being an issue, but I think that, it's something that we can continue to revisit as needed. As far as the agenda item, I imagine that we can either have Jim or Corey share from the legislative committee the new bills and particular positions that may have been taken, and then if Jeff is able to join us, he can provide any additional information, any questions that council members may have as well.
So my ask on that is, when Jeff is bringing forward new bills, is he bringing forward every new bill, or are we just doing Northglenn-centric stuff?
Just Northglenn-centric
Okay,
stuff.
okay,
Yeah,
because that's
he,
important to me.
Yeah, so we
We don't even look at all the bills.
I'm just making sure.
I will say, you know, with Jeff, what he does is he takes a look at every single bill as it's introduced and flags the ones that may be, may pertain to Northglenn or something that we may have interest in. And those are the bills that we take a look in, do a deeper dive in, and determine whether or not we want to take a position.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Because I think what triggered this discussion, at least in part, is taking positions on bills that may not be, we may not have guidance in the city's adopted legislative issues guide. And so I guess what I would ask for direction on in terms of the question is this every bill? Or is only bills that we don't have direction in our policy guide? So for example, if there's issues that impact our home rule authority, we know from this what the city's position is. Likewise, if it's an urban renewal bill, we know because it's explicit. My understanding of some of the concern of the Legislative Policy Committee was on bills that may not be evident from our policy guide, and the example is the teen suicide bill from the last week, where it doesn't really neatly fit into any of the city's issues guide policies, but it was important to the Legislative Policy Committee. And if it is only those issues that are not reflected in the city's guide, I think this discussion is much easier and much shorter, and there's two parts of it. One is making sure that the remainder of council has all of the information that Jeff is providing us in terms of the dossier. So if there is something that council has, any other members of council that aren't as part of the legislative committee have questions on, they've got the information, they can ask the question. And then secondly, in terms of policy guidance, at least what I had understood was the guidance the Legislative Policy Committee was seeking was on those bills that aren't covered by the city's guide. Did I get that right, or is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
So for me, I would prefer that we stay focused on the issues that were addressed in here, and that we're not getting to a place where who determines it rises to the top, because is that your personal thing that it's rising to the top, or is that because it's a council thing? And then I would say that if we choose to move something forward, then I think it's only fair that we look at what the contract is for lobbyists. If we're asking a major contribution and being here far more often than his contract is negotiated, I don't think it's fair to ask him to do that without revisiting it.
I had a process question, Corey, and getting to the issue of the agenda and what we're showing on the agenda. I mean, and this kind of relates to where it would appear on the agenda, because if we ask Jeff to sit around till 10:30 some night, that might not be the best approach either. But I'm thinking if we're having I'll just use an example of the last 2 weeks. So we have a committee meeting on February 26th, and we're discussing bills at that committee meeting. We clearly don't have time to put it on the agenda for that night, so it would be something, in this case, we put on March 12th. Does that does that give us enough time, or will things be moving too fast? That
Can I?
Yeah, please. I'm just throwing it out there.
At least what I had anticipated perhaps, is that if the council has all of the information that is being provided to the Legislative Policy Committee, including a heads up on new bills, you're going to see bills that, again, fit within the guide. I think the issue is those that don't. And if it is something as simple as Legislative Policy Committee update, discussion and possible action on new bills, and then the council can decide, is it a formal vote? You can sort of have that discussion and possible action on new bills as a placeholder, or is it some sort of consensus? And that's really a council protocol question. I mean, I appreciate the discussion about transparency, and there's two ways to look at that. If council is trying to show that all 9 Northglenn City Council members believe Northglenn should take a position on X, whatever that is, having that discussion in a public meeting is a very good way to have that direction given. On the other hand, we touched on this a little bit last Monday, if there are new policy issues where there may be a split on council, I mean, I think part of the question for council to decide is, do you want to vote on that and give direction that maybe it's a 6-3 vote or a 5-4 vote to take a position? Or do you want to assure that there is a broad consensus on the council before a position's taken? And again, that's a discussion for council in terms of how best to give that direction.
So let me make sure I understand what you're saying then. We could put a standing item on there, legislative policy committee update, discussion, possible action. We could put it near the top of the agenda as opposed to 10 o'clock or something. And then as long as we provided the dossier out to the entire council, then you've got all the information that the committee has. And then it's really just a matter of highlighting.
That's one way of doing it.
So we have a 5:30 meeting, and then at 7 o'clock we're highlighting what we talked about at 5:30.
Because again, I think that the group of bills that are not reflected in the policy statement have been pretty small. So I don't think this isn't a very expansive approach at all. Again, I think the entire session we're probably talking about less than 10, probably less than 5 bills so far, would be my guess.
I think, first of all, is this something that the policy committee can live with until this legislative session is over, and then we can revisit, and if there's some changes that you guys feel should be, or the entire council, anyone on the council feels should be made, we can make them. But until then, can you live under the parameters, like bringing bills forward that are addressed under these parameters?
I don't think it's the end of the world, but one thing I would like to see added to this would be a focus on health and public health, especially for our residents. I just feel like that's something that our city should be concerned about, is the quality of life our residents have and bills that may affect that. I know that's a little broad, but I'm not really sure how to boil it down anymore than that.
And I hear you on that, but I also hear when you're bringing that up that somewhere tax dollars will come into supporting that, and then to me that gets a little muddier as to how clear I feel about, from a council position as a mayor, what I feel the best position for me would be. That's one of those questionable things.
City tax dollars or state?
It's city, yeah, city.
Okay.
Yeah, city tax dollars.
Because usually with any public health initiative, there's no money attached, so we don't have to worry about that. But
yeah, I mean, it's just those ones where there's going to be gray area that I'm concerned about. I'm not concerned about any of this. I fully feel that Jeff is giving good counsel. I know CML supports all home rule authority, so I get that we're covered on that stuff. But it's just the others, and I'm not sure how much that's even going to come forward, so.
So as I'm looking at this, I mean, it's broad, but I don't feel like it fully encompasses everything that impacts our city. I mean, there's certainly nothing in here about there's public safety, but it talks about, you know, legislation that resolves the issue of medical expenses for individuals in custody. It opposes state legislation that would jeopardize or impair the reliability of the E911 system. But there's no conversation around like the opioid epidemic, for example. And I mean, are we simply making an assumption that the opioid epidemic is covered under public safety, and that and then, you know, we're able to make a decision around how we direct Jeff to use his time? I mean, there's nothing in here about the environment. There's nothing in here around recycling, nothing. I mean, it's pretty much just sales and use tax, urban renewal. There was a paint bill that we just opposed.
And CML opposed it too.
Right, but that, I mean, where would that fall under here? Like, I don't know that it necessarily does. And so I think that, you know, if we're only looking at bills relegated to sales and use tax or to public safety as it pertains to these two particular bullet points, our pool of bills is going to be very, very, very small. And at least throughout this, you know, the last couple of months, the bills that we've been looking at
I think you could probably make an argument fall within these categories, but I don't know that this policy statement actually reflects some of the bills that we're taking a stance on, which is part of the reason that, you know, I think that we should have a discussion and we should be more open and transparent about some of the issues that the committee is taking a stance on, because this doesn't reflect our current council. This is an older document. I think we saw that at our last council retreat, that this council is very different. And so I'm asking for a conversation each week. I'm not asking for an hour or half an hour. I'm asking for a check-in around some of the bills that are coming forward and what positions we're taking a stance on, and that way we can direct our lobbyists as necessary.
I'm okay with that part, but I think the difference between you and I at this point is that I don't feel Northglenn needs to take a stand on the opioid epidemic, because obviously we all want that mitigated. But some of those issues that you brought up, I just don't think as the Northglenn City Councilor, I mean, I'm not a state house rep making an actual vote on something, so I'm not sure that I feel that that's my place to do. And I don't know that the residents feel that's the best use of my time also.
Well, I mean, I completely disagree specifically around the opioid epidemic when we have residents getting awards in here because they're administering Narcan. We clearly have an opioid problem. And I think that if we don't use our position on council to take a stance on some of the things that are happening at the State House, then Northglenn doesn't have a voice, and that's a problem. And that's exactly why we have a paid lobbyist. It's exactly why we have a legislative committee. And I think that we need to be figuring out what our process is so our voices are heard.
We will agree to disagree, so somebody else better tell me how to move forward on that, because I disagree.
So, Mayor, well, you know, and I'm listening to the conversation, and first of all, we didn't have a legislative committee for quite a while, well, ever, you know. And then we deemed it necessary when there were certain things that were happening in the county versus the city. So we decided to have a legislative committee. And out of that committee came this little process, which is only a little over a year old. And so I think this is something that we can work forward with. It's not old. This is actually relatively new. And I don't think we should be looking at old council versus new council. I think we should take what the legislative committee did last year and improve upon it, you know, rather than having this type of discourse. You know, I really think there's valid information on both sides, you know, and valid opinions on both sides. I really believe that. And I was reading that too, and I think we need to add more things to it as far as under public safety or whatever it might be. The first legislative committee didn't think about those things, and you are the legislative committee now. So I'm suggesting that maybe you come up with some improvements and or more bullets, or another policy or a second policy, or however you want to discuss it. I'm not opposed to looking at different legislation. I've always thought that we should look at it. I was CML rep for a long time. I have Dr. Cog, and there's lots of different ways that we can improve upon it. And, and a lot of these things, opioids, it's definitely something that Northglenn should be looking at, or at least supporting in some way. And public health. I mean, and maybe it's public health that goes in, the opioids goes in with that. I don't know. And I'm not on the legislative committee, but I certainly respect what you're doing, but I do want to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because I don't want you to take a stance that I really am not comfortable with.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
But are you comfortable with the process where if the process is that we're not going with unanimous, we're going with consensus? And from what I heard from you, it was, what was the word of consensus?
No, I'm asking the question. I think the
so
question is...
So you might get overruled anyway if it goes through consensus, so then...
But then, well, and that's true, and as a city, I would never go against the city, if I was, 6 to 9 or whatever it is, and I was, but on the other hand, I as an individual can go down to the state and speak as an individual saying, I oppose this. I'm not speaking for the city of Northglenn, but I oppose this. And I would certainly do that if I was adamant about something.
Yes. I agree with what Joyce is saying, and I agree with Jenny and Julie, and I think this is a perfect opportunity to fix. If you think it needs some addition and some fixing, then do that, bring it to us, and let's get a consensus on what we want to pursue, because I agree that opiates is a problem, just as affordable housing is a problem, which is gun control is a problem. I mean, these are the things that are national headlines. This lady called me today asking me about banning assault weapons. I said, well, I can't do that. You know, that's not something I can do. But that's in the headlines, and our public is not as well informed as we are, nor we are as well informed as the State House is. So in order to bridge that gap, I think you be proactive. We don't have to agree with you, but let's see what you got. And that's why we have 2 attorneys and a city manager to say, stop.
So I guess I just don't know if it's formal action, or not. That I don't know the best way to do something like that.
Well,
I know Marcy has a comment too.
I was just gonna say that, for me, if it comes forward and we're addressing things that I don't feel that are Northglenn things for us to discuss, and I can foresee a couple of those happening, I will go against the city. I'm voting against what I think is what our role is here versus what is our role as an individual versus what our role is as senator versus what our role is in any other position. And if I can't correlate it right back here to Northglenn and you start bringing things, and I think your gun bill, an example of one that if you're asking me to take a stand on that, we're gonna have a huge conversation here because it's not something that I would, as a city, attach my name to and be voting yes for. So, I just think there's a lot of things that could be coming forward that the committee is gonna deem that it's a city thing and it's gonna become this tension discussion. And I'm up for that discussion, but I will not vote because I don't wanna go against my city. I vote what I think is right for the city.
Well, and to make it clear, I would vote no, something I adamantly don't, like. I'm just saying, once the vote is taken, then I'm just I will go personally, as an individual. That's all. That's what I was.
Because I feel like there's 2 votes. There's the vote for do we support the bill or not, but what if a bill comes to the table that we don't feel is a city issue, that the legislative committee thinks it should be? Is that the first discussion? So you would discuss first, is this a discussable idea, yes or no? And then if it's yes, then we move forward and say, yes, we support it, or no, we don't. So it's kind of a 2-part?
Could be. I mean, what I was envisioning, and this is just from listening to the conversations, was that what is framed as a city issue, ideally, should be in here.
Right.
Okay? Not always, but I think the goal of this document is to identify those issues that matter to the city. Short-term, long-term. And I think the way this was drafted was with some broad areas and then examples as to specifics. So when I look at public safety, for example, it says public safety is a primary responsibility of the city. I think that's a policy statement that is inclusive as opposed to exclusive. Then I think there's 2 therefores, but I don't see those as saying those are the only 2 areas that the city is going to support in terms of public safety. But at least what I had thought from taking away the discussion at the policy committee level was, okay, we have this issue, and again, I'll use the teen suicide because I think that's to me, made the example the best. Northglenn's never taken a position on something like that. Is it an issue that falls within public safety? The policy committee certainly thought so. And so, at least in my mind, that was a good discussion item to bring forward. And I guess I would combine the 2 issues and say, A, is it a policy that we want to address? And if so, then here's the recommended position, because it wasn't contemplated in this document. So that's at least using that as an example how I had thought about it.
So can we pick an example that's more challenging?
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know anyone who's pro teen suicide, right? So I think that's one that's a little more cut and dry. I don't know what the actual bill
Well,
was.
let me just on, so that, and I'm going to probably speak a little bit for Jeff in an area I'm not familiar with, and so I'm going to give that with that caveat. But looking at a bill like teen suicide, I agree it's an easy one in terms of getting your head around, but part of what you do when you are representing a municipality at the legislature is you have certain people you talk to and certain issues that you're familiar with. I'm not sure Jeff would know who to caucus with to talk, because we don't normally deal with mental health type issues. And so there's not a group we immediately say, oh, this is who I talk to about this, because it's not typically the type of bill a city takes a position on. That doesn't make it wrong. It's just not normally in a municipal wheelhouse, if that makes sense. So that's why that is sort of even though it's easy to say, yeah, teen suicide's bad and we need to take all the steps we can, that doesn't necessarily make it a typical municipal issue.
So this is what I'm wondering, because this small conversation has taken a bit of time. And so if we were to do that at every city council meeting, where here's a bill and then we're gonna spin like this about whether or not we think it's a municipal issue, we might not get anywhere. So we're gonna have to have maybe some more parameters or something, because we really could be here a really long time.
Well, and from my understanding of this, we would only, we could do an overview of the bills that the committee opposes and supports, just as an overview. If it falls within this guide, it's not necessarily needs to go up for discussion for the group, because it's pretty straightforward, a lot of our positions. I mean, it's not really any discussion. The only bills that would be brought up for discussion are those that are outside this guide, and so that's what I was kind of thinking when it came to this, which so far this session has been, I don't even know, more than 2? I don't even know if there's been more than 2. So, I mean, that's the only, so there's only been maybe 3 bills that were like, we don't know where to sit on this, we don't really know if this is if we should take a stance on this, so the number is really low.
I guess my question though, Jim, is on that one particular bill, and I do not remember what it was, we wanted to send, I think it was actually around speed limits.
Oh, yeah.
And allowing a municipality to change or adjust speed limits in particular areas. And we wanted to support the bill, but nobody from the Legislative Policy Committee could go and testify. And so we wanted to send a letter, but there was some confusion about whether or not we were allowed to, because council had not formally taken a position outside of the members of the Legislative Committee. And so, that's that's an example that I think is going to continue to come up, that I'm trying to figure out, what do we do to make sure that we don't have, rushed emails that are happening between council members, and the actions that we are taking are public and transparent.
I didn't appreciate that there was a concern about whether it was a position the city could take, because I thought it was well within the policy statement, it was discretion, even if it was a letter, from my perspective, and this never got to my desk, but when I heard this discussion, I never had a concern as to whether it was authorized. So whether it be testimony or a letter, because it was well within the policy committee and the issues that the city had identified as being important to it, how we conveyed that direction, to me, was up to kind of the team.
And that one specifically was under the home rule, where it was impacting our home rule decision making.
Yeah. So I don't know what happened. I don't know but certainly I didn't think it was a question of whether the policy committee had the authority to go forward.
So I kind of feel like everybody agrees that we definitely should have this as an agenda item and talk about it. Or are you not, maybe?
No, I want to be in the loop. I'm just worried about process and about how long it's going to take us to sort that out. And maybe it just is occasionally, as Julie mentioned, if there were just a few. But I think there's the 2-part conversation. Should we be discussing the bill? Yes or no? If it's yes, then we have a different conversation after that. But if we don't have the first one,
somebody's making an assumption somewhere. Does that make sense?
That's right.
One thing I was hearing is that everybody's going to get the dossier.
Yeah.
It's starting to sound like that. I'm doing it for the committee already. This way, everybody can get that. Then everybody knows what we're doing, what we're supporting, what we're opposing, what we're monitoring. Somebody has heartburn about something, thinks we got to elevate a monitor bill to an opposed bill, or that we're supporting something we shouldn't be supporting. That can always be raised. Right? That'd be one thing. So there's kind of a opt-out kind of option just by circulating that thing. I can tell you one, just as long as I'm running my mouth, the reason for developing a policy statement in the first place last year was modeled after the role the policy statement serves at CML, which is it provides direction between council meetings, where we don't have a bill comes in, something's going to happen fast, we don't have time to get, go through completely the policy process. This serves as direction. That was the concept. But it was also always envisioned as a dynamic document. Nothing is fixed. As folks get interested in public health and opioids and so forth, But I shared Corey's broad interpretation of this. It says public safety includes safety from opioids.
And I guess the only other thing I would add is that, and I hope it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, the Legislative Policy Committee meeting at 5:30 on the council Mondays is open to the public. And certainly last year, we had a member of council that showed up at every Legislative Policy Committee meeting that was not on the committee. And so if council receives the dossier and says, this issue matters to me a lot, and I want to be at that discussion, we're there. And it's open to the public, it's open, of course, to council.
That's a good point.
Could show up at 5:30. So
I'm wondering if everybody would be okay if we add this as an item, and until next year, when I'm feeling that this is going to need to be changed. And I'm okay if this is changed, and it includes public health, and we agree to include public health, I'm all about it. And then we don't have to have the individual conversations about an opioid thing or youth suicide prevention. I get that part. If it's in the policy, I'm good. So I'm wondering if that's okay, and then current things that might come forward, how did you say we address that as a further action item on the agenda?
yeah, what I was suggesting is Legislative Policy Committee update, discussion and possible action. And then it alerts the public that there may be something that comes out of the Policy Committee discussion at 5:30 and brought forward at 7 o'clock you may take action on.
How does everybody feel about doing it that way?
For now.
Yeah, it's good for now. Okay, and then this would be a conversation for after the legislative session's over this year. So we have a new one for next year. That's probably going to be a bit broader, I would assume. Yes. I do want to mention something, though. So when you talk about the policy statement of the CML, it's interesting that we're having this conversation because at the CML board meeting, the last meeting, the policy committee voted to very much minimize the education piece of the CML's policy statement. So when that came to the board was kind of appalled, like across the board. They were thinking, why would you ever minimize education? So I'm not sure, because I wasn't at the policy committee meeting, how that went down. It could have been something maybe nobody really understood what was happening, because that happens. But I'm just saying that other entities go through these types of growing pains. So I'm okay with moving forward the way that we're talking now, if everybody else is okay with that. So.
And just to clarify, we're talking the regular council meetings.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
that's the only meetings you can take action at, so.
Yes.
But the dossier comes out weekly. So look for the email literally every Sunday.
I mean, everybody could get that if you want.
Yeah.
You could get my ruminations on what happened that week at the Capitol. It's utterly
They're
fascinating.
quite amusing sometimes, actually, so.
Depends on how bad a week it was.
Okay.
So I have two questions. One is for the next regularly scheduled council meeting, what do you all want? Do you want an overview of the bills that we've previously taken a position on, or do you just want to know new pieces of legislation and any items that fall outside of this established purview?
I personally would be okay with new and moving forward. That's just my opinion.
I like the clean slate, and let's just look at the new stuff.
Okay.
No point, right?
That's okay, Antonia, yes? Okay.
I can tell you this time of year, there isn't much new
There's
stuff.
probably
Yeah.
not
You
a
know.
lot.
And then second question was, I also wanted to invite Jeff to come in at the end of the ledge session and give us an overview and formal presentation, much in the way that we asked our youth commission to come in and give a formal presentation. Is that something that we can all agree is useful and important?
Cool.
You want to do that?
Oh, I'd love to do that. I gotta write it up anyway. So I should do basically an oral presentation of something I already do in written form.
Would that be at a study or at a regular? It doesn't matter.
Either way, yeah. And we did that in June last year, right? When that, got the written report done in June, and then we could come present it.
We would love to see you, so you're always welcome.
And just for
Okay.
the new members of the committee, I mean, what we did last summer too, after the session had ended, is that, you know, if there was any, you know, hanging on things like the special session that they had to come back for, you know, we're aware of those. But we actually spent the summer revising the policy and wordsmithing it. And so then when it came to council, literally, I think August or September, council was ready to adopt it as a document. And then we had our legislative dinner in October, and we were able to hand out the policy at that point. So I think we've got a good process in place, but yeah, this gets revised every year for sure.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks for
Thank
coming
you.
out tonight, Jeff. Appreciate it
betcha.
very much. Does anybody have anything, any business? No, seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Nope.